Excellent. Well, I'm here today with Alfonso Fiore, Head of Packaged Products at AirAsia, who is speaking as part of our virtual leadership summit at the Prod MBA. Alfonso, maybe to start, we spoke, when did we speak? Maybe 6 months ago, I think.
Yeah, I think it's about right.
Yeah. I know that AirAsia has obviously gone through a difficult year. Maybe a good first question is, firstly, what does product leadership mean to you? And secondly, how do you feel that your views have changed over this year, maybe?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, Henry. And it was nice chat last time, so hopefully it's going to be interesting as well today. I think product leadership to me means aligning people and making sure that the organization kind of goes in the same direction. I think this is more, it's very valuable because even when you have people that are hard worker and they do the right type of work, if people pull in different direction, then the overall company doesn't progress in the right way. So I think leadership in this sense is making sure that everyone from senior and junior product managers to designers to engineers to engineering manager, data scientists, researcher, they all go in the same direction so that we can all pull the company in the same direction. And in terms of what have been the changes in this year, I think probably obviously we had to kind of really reconsider what were our plans, and we kind of try to kind of go back to basics and really focus on user experience, trying to understand exactly what customer really wanted. But in reality, I think there are certain things that are in our purvey that we can actually change and impact, and those stay the same, right? They are our user experience, our ability to listen to customer. As a company, of course, AirAsia has changed a lot, right? Because we were already in the midst of our plans to become a super app, and that's exactly what we're doing. But of course, we put a little bit more accent on things which are less relevant and less needed for travel. And so we have a bunch of products now that are available, which are not strictly related to travel.
Oh, interesting. You mentioned it's a really interesting point there, which I've taken as like a personal philosophy always, but I think particularly relevant this year, particularly relevant as an entrepreneur, which is like, what are things out of your control versus things that are in your control? And I imagine as AirAsia, it's like, massive hit to the business model, obviously by people not being able to really travel. But I really like that, also being clear on that and saying that here is a circle of things that's within our control, user experience, using customer insight, these kinds of things, and just really focusing on that, which, I imagine sets you up really well when things go back to normal next year.
Correct. So that's exactly the goal. You're right. That's a very important point. And, this ties a little bit to this, to one of the question that I really dread, which is like, oh, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or this kind of question, which I think I kind of missed the point. And I was listening to a YouTuber just a few days ago, and he said that something that I found that really resonated with what we're saying, right? He said, when people start on YouTube, they start having like these lofty goals of this many subscriber, or this and that, but those are all things that are out of your control. And so he was saying, what I did? I decided that in 1 year, I will have 365 videos in my channel. And that's something that is entirely in my control. And I think that's exactly what we're doing, right? What we're doing here is we're trying to connect to as many providers as possible in order to make sure that we have the best offers for our customers. We are concentrating on price because we know that price matters, especially now that there is a little bit of a strain in people, in their finances. So we really want to make sure that, our offers are always the best available in the market. And we really try to leverage our position in all those markets to be relevant and provide both the choice, but also the user experience, as we said earlier, that we believe are going to help our customers find what they're looking for. So that's how we try to put our effort in what we think we can impact. But the outcome, unfortunately, is out of our abilities to dictate.
Yeah. No, I think that's so good, and it's also really inspiring to see a large organization do that and do that quite effectively. Because so a lot of people I've interacted with in the last year, you just see them, slightly overwhelmed by things or worried about, when's the vaccine coming, this kind of stuff, and it's like, sure, there's part of you that should worry about it, be aware of it, but unless you're a scientist, there's not much you're going to be able to do there. So it's just
Yeah,
focus on what you can. Business technology generally is still going, and many companies are actually doing quite well this year. So I think that's a policy that I'm always, or a philosophy that I'm always trying to remember. I think also outside of the pandemic, I think it's such a more effective way to think about it. But you mentioned that YouTuber, that was really interesting, right? The importance of process and practice and repetition over, fixed goals. Because as you said, we never know the outcome. And I think that's a really important part of product generally, is you can't predict the outcome, but you can put in place a really good process.
correct. And this is, in fact, is something that we are really focusing on right now, kind of hypothesis testing, right? And this is something that I see it's really, really important again, and it drives that alignment that I mentioned earlier, right? So for example, every time now, what I'm doing with my team is that every time we bring new ideas to the designer, to the engineers, we're trying to kind of use a tried and tested setup. And we really say, okay, based on this observation, we expect that this change will actually have this particular impact on the customer, and we will measure that impact by measuring this particular KPI. And by kind of really following that kind of way to structure our thoughts, we really create that kind of alignment that makes sure that designers know exactly what they're working on, engineers understand exactly what is the goal, data scientists. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that ties in. I'm seeing a theme there because something we mentioned before recording is your belief that you don't believe in growth teams, that you believe in a growth mindset, which I agree with as well. Actually, it's really about as we touched upon there with if you want to get YouTube subscribers, it's building in a good process, thinking about the right kinds of things, and then ultimately results should come from that. Maybe to make this a bit more actionable for listeners, like what are specific, so you mentioned there, for example, like you are with your product teams, you come in with, here's the observation, like here's the expected outcome, here's the goal. Any specific tactics or, lessons you've learned to help ingrain these, maybe the kind of things you want people to be doing and thinking about? So you mentioned like thinking about growth, thinking about, expected outcome, these kinds of things.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of time, especially when you work with talented people, with motivated people, management is really a lot of common sense, right? There is no silver bullet, but it's very much kind of repetition of certain basic principles. So one thing that, for example, I found very, very important is problem statements. It seems so obvious, but clarifying at the beginning of a meeting, at the beginning of a document, at the beginning of a user story, what is exactly the problem that you're trying to solve? It's so silly, but it happened to me, like when you're saying about real experience, right? It happened to me more than I can count, that people kind of think that they agree and they say, oh, we're all fine. And then I kind of always taken upon myself to write notes to make sure that everybody has something on writing. And then more often than I can count, after writing notes, people start saying, oh, no, but that's not exactly what I was thinking. Oh, no, this is not what I understood. And so those little things, like having clear problem statement, very well defined, or maybe taking notes every single meeting so that action items are very clear for everyone and what's next. Those are really the thing that move the needle, because a lot of time, and I'm sure we've all been in that situation, a lot of time you don't pay attention, your calendar becomes full of meetings, but there is really nothing that comes out of it, right? And so it's important that you can use your time in an efficient way, and by having clear problem statement, but having clear action items, I think those are the ways that you can actually drive that change.
Yeah, and that's it's the lesson to take away, I think, for particularly for like junior, mid-level product managers, is things in a way get more simple the higher you go. Obviously, there's more things to stress you out, more things to worry about, but actually, like the things you need to be doing generally is just simplify, like repeat. As
Yeah.
you said, just realize, use these mental models, like realize there is this sort of illusion of alignment all the time. Like we all think we're talking about the same thing, but actually we've all interpreted it quite differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of like
And to continue on that, right? Another thing is like documentation, for example.
yeah.
Now I've become more and more kind of concerned about, okay, do we have a Confluence page about it? Do we have this written somewhere so that we can refer people to that, so that they have any question, they can actually go back, go there and find it. So those are tiny things, but eventually they add up and they really make a difference between an organization that kind of goes in circle and an organization that is well structured and go in the right direction. And you mentioned like very practical things, right? I'm not sure if I pronounce it right, but when in writing user stories, I've been now using for a couple of years the Gherkin methodology, where you can clearly state user acceptance criteria with when, given, when, then. And I found that also that it's very, very important compared to just a bullet list of acceptance criteria, because that kind of structure, it takes a little bit, as many of the things that I'm using, right? Those are things that if you start to spring them on people, it takes them a little bit by surprise, and it takes a little bit to actually get used to them. But the moment you get used to it and you get used to that sort of clarity, you really don't want to go back, because you miss it, right? The moment you start throwing some acceptance criteria in a list of bullets, people will be like, no, but what exactly do you mean?
Yeah,
what is exactly the situation you want that to happen?
could you give an example of that framework? I haven't heard of it, actually. It sounds really interesting.
Oh, yeah. So again, I do really apologize if I pronounced it wrong. But basically, the idea is, for example, imagine if I want to say like, for example, now I'm working on a widget, right? On a search widget that we want to show to the screen, right? And I want to say that that as the user kind of is a reactive screen, right? But basically, when the user changes the screen, right? This new banner has to follow the main screen above. So I could simply say, the image has to fit, the new image that we're creating has to fit the screen above, and that would be it, right? But instead, maybe what I'm writing is, given the user resizes the screen, when the user stops resizing the screen, then these two images have to align again, right? And this really clearly gives the engineer a perfect understanding of what the product manager has in mind in terms of user experience, because this action kicks in exactly in the moment that the PM specified in the acceptance criteria, versus a generic icon of, resize the screen. Yeah, maybe you're lucky, and maybe the engineers, after many years of working with the silly product managers, is used to read minds, and he knows exactly what he's doing. But it's clearly not as simple as to follow a more structured approach. So it almost like provides product managers a tool which is similar to engineering, because it's very well structured, right? And so it's much easier for them to then translate it into actual code.
Yeah, that's great, actually. I'm going to research that and start using it. I also like that. So now the demonstration, I feel, of like obviously as a, very senior, just demonstrates this theme that I've seen throughout our conversation, our last time we spoke as well, that everything you're doing seems to be just that one level up from what most product managers are thinking. It's how do I convey the core thing here that is really important? Because ultimately with the user story, like if you have 8 bullet points, it's probably fine if 1 or 2 of them aren't delivered on, maybe even most of them. But I think by just giving that level up of saying that this is pretty much, this is what we need, like how you do it can be a bit flexible, but this is how it should feel and look like. That's the thing that really matters, I suppose.
Yeah, correct. I think it also depends on the team, right? If there are teams which are way more, able to work autonomously, then of course maybe a product manager can just, jolt notes. And this is the experience, like from a friend and colleague. He told me that he had a different approach. So obviously this is agile, right? So that it has to work for the entire team. And maybe some team might feel a bit constrained in terms of like having a too structured user story. But I feel that with the team that I've been working with so far, it's actually been well received, because the engineers appreciate really that clarity, that, okay, I
Yeah.
know that I'm working exactly on what we agreed, right? And I think, you're right. It really depends on the people that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, on that as well, something I just always frustrates me is seeing teams that are very unmotivated and unclear on objectives, because, ultimately people want autonomy and want purpose, right? They want to be feeling like what they're doing is contributing. The big problem though is that there are very few people like yourself who are good at conveying, or that understand that the more senior they go, the more it is about planting a flag, pointing everyone towards it, nudging them in the right direction. And they still think it's about this lower level stuff, like, my user stories need to be perfectly written, or I need to give my team exact direction because that was what I was taught in my Scrum certification, et cetera, et cetera. And I think obviously the more senior you get, it's about actually, there's all these tools you can use, like Scrum is useful, like Agile as it is practice is useful, but it needs to be contextualized and say, okay, well, here's this convention about how to do user stories, but for this team, it doesn't actually make sense. Right? As you
Yes.
said, for this team that, they're smart, they're autonomous, they understand where we're going. Like, you don't need to give them that close. You don't need to hold their hand, let's say, with everything they do.
Correct. Yeah. And this is something that I've learned in the past, right? Because especially now teams come to mind where it wasn't like there were a lot of like senior engineer and more junior engineer. And it was actually quite interesting because the contrast was very stark, right? They were senior engineer, they kind of almost to the level of feeling offended, right? That, hey, why do you write so much detail? This is kind of obvious stuff. And the junior engineer that would be like, no, this is awesome. I love it, right? Please keep it exactly that way. And then of course it becomes a balance, right? And then sometimes, you understand that, and then communication, right? And you were mentioning earlier, right? I was actually in a meeting of product managers a couple of weeks back, right? And the host asked everybody to write their own mantra. And one guy I remember wrote, there is no such a thing as over communication. And I find that very interesting, right? Because I actually, my boss a couple of times told me that, hey, you tend to repeat yourself quite a lot, and it's true. But I actually do it on purpose because I really think that if I have to summarize what I think product management is, at the end of the day, I always say product management is about driving clarity, right? And you drive that clarity through your communication, through your documentation, through your way you align, to the fact that, you take notes for your meetings. That's like, the servant leader kind of idea, right? You really work hard to make sure that everybody's aligned. And those simple practical things are really the way that those things come to life.
Yeah, that's such a nice way of phrasing it. I love that, actually. Product management is driving clarity and also being a servant leader, as you said. I think that's something that starts, more and more is becoming a thing, is, realizing that you are there to create value and provide value and let others around you really prosper. Ultimately, so that ideally at some point you sort of step back and your teams are running effectively, which again comes
absolutely back. And this is actually something that I've been doing right now with one of the teams, and I'm super happy because I can see that as if you put the right foundation in the team, especially in the product manager, and you're a little bit, to be honest, strict when it's needed to be, because you really want to drive that kind of alignment in terms of the importance of a problem statement, the importance of documentation. And then slowly now I'm taking a step back, and I can see that things are still fine. And obviously as a product manager, one of the flows, I'm sure that we have many others, but one of the flows of product manager is that, we always feel like, oh, if I'm not there, everything will crumble. Obviously that's not the case. And seeing that things continue to work very, very well as I kind of retreat one step at a time, it's actually very fulfilling. And it makes me feel like, I've done a good job, because, the best thing is that when you're not there, things continue working exactly the same way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a great metric as well to set for yourself, how well are you doing in your role, is ultimately how much can I step up. And that's such a good point as well that, people miss. Ultimately, it comes down to your customer is important, but your team is more important. And I think ultimately you helping them grow doesn't necessarily mean just helping them deliver for your current company, but actually getting them to to be learning by working autonomously, by enjoying their work more because they have autonomy, a greater sense of purpose, be able to sort of take these ideas when they eventually, step up in a role or maybe move company. I think that's a great sort of metric to set. But I think that's a great place to finish. I definitely want to do a follow-up. I have a few other topics that I'd love to discuss.
Absolutely.
Just to recap before we sign off. So I love some of the points you said there. Product management is ultimately about alignment. The more senior you get, it's really about simplifying things. You gave a few really nice sort of specific tactics for any aspiring product leaders listening. Talked about, just simplifying everything, starting with a problem statement always, even if you feel it's silly or unnecessary. I 100% agree with you on that. Document everything to aid clarity. Focus your user stories on, what really matters. What is the core user experience rather than a big list, using this given, when, then process. And again, that point really, I think I completely agree with. The more senior you get, break conventions a little and, use what makes sense for the specific team you're working with. And that ultimately, as you said, just towards the end there, product management is about driving clarity. It's about being a servant leader. So some really, really good nuggets of information. As I said, Alfonso, I'd love to do a follow-up. But thank you very much for your time. Is there anywhere you want people to follow you or, read anything or post?
Yeah, so to be honest, I'm not the most active social media user, but, LinkedIn is definitely the place where, if I have some thoughts, I'll share them there. And if anyone wants to reach out, that would be the right place.
Awesome. Well, I'm linking your LinkedIn when I send out our chat in a week or so. So everybody that's listening can follow Alfonso on there. Alfonso, it's been a pleasure as usual. And yeah, I'd love to do a follow-up in a couple of months. So thank you.
Absolutely, Henry. It's always a pleasure speaking, and good luck to you and to the people following you.